When you look at these maps, you will see they are off by 3 to 5 degrees for a very good reason. According to documentary evidence, we have Jacob of Edessa, a Christian writer, suggesting that he refers to the Maghreb. So from all this, it is clear that it is not to the south that the Jews in the Maghreb, that means the Arabs, here in the regions of Syria, pray, but towards Jerusalem or the Kaaba, the patriarchal places of their races. So even as late as 705, a Christian writer thought it was towards Jerusalem they were praying, because he didn't look at it very carefully. Of course, he didn't have GPS like we have today. That's where Dan Gibson comes in. Dan spent 25 years asking this question. And he wrote 2 books, Quranic Geography and now this book. And this is the book that now unpacks all of that. What he did is he personally went to every early mosque. He's the only one that I know of that has gone to all 65 of the earliest mosques. Physically gone there, studied them, looked and found where the Qiblas were for every one of these mosques. Took photographs of all the earliest mosques, and this is what he has found. Looking at all the numerous mosques, I'm going to go through very quickly what he has found, because otherwise this will take for hours. The earliest mosque they can talk about is the 626, known as the Mosque of the Two Qiblas in Medina. And it's always been called the Mosque of the Two Qiblas, but no one really understood why, because it's facing Mecca. So what's the second Qibla? Why is it called the Two Qiblas? It was only in 1987 that they found out why. When they started doing some refurbishment to the mosque and started digging down through the foundation, they found that there was a second Qibla this way. Here's the mosque, here's the Qibla facing Mecca. But they found an entirely new Qibla wall facing this direction, facing the complete opposite direction. Now they understood why it was always known as the Mosque of the Two Qiblas. So where is that second, earlier Qibla facing? Not Jerusalem, but Petra, 626. So this is before Muhammad died. You already have a mosque that is facing completely the wrong direction. In China, Guangzhou, Canton, as far as China, there's a mosque there. It's still there today. You can still look at the Qibla and look and see where the Qibla is. It was built in 627. It's facing Petra, as far away as Guangzhou. Now, I have heard many Muslims say, so I'm using Google Earth, therefore it's very inaccurate. Listen, I didn't do this research. Dan Gibson did. He would never use Google Earth. Google Earth is much too inexact, and it follows a flat plane. It follows a flat Earth idea, because you have to have a flat Earth in order to drive. He did not use Google Earth. He used ArchNet, put out by MIT, the most sophisticated GPS formation, so that you can see exact coordinates. He went to every one of these places, and he used ArchNet to find their coordinates. That's why he could say, and he got these so accurate. Look at this one. The Sharman Juma Mosque in India. Look at the date, 629. Muhammad died in 632. We're still before Muhammad's death. Look at the direction it's facing. It's facing Petra. The Jami Hama Al-Kabir Mosque in Syria. Now we jump to Syria. Look where it's facing. It's facing Petra, not Mecca. The Fustat Mosque, the same mosque that Faravari and Creswell had noticed back in 1905, over 100 years ago, Gibson found that they were completely wrong. It was not facing Jerusalem. It was off by 3 degrees to Jerusalem. That it's facing Petra. Look at the date, 642. We're still in the 7th century. And if you look, you can see carefully that it's still living, it's still existing. And then we get to the Dome of the Rock, 690, built in 690 by Abdul Malik. I told you I'd get back to his name. We're going to talk quite a bit about Abdul Malik. You'll see the significance. This is the Dome of the Rock in the Gorge Mosque, in fact, possibly the greatest building structure of its day, built in 690s or to 691. And look and see where it's facing. Now, I got caught out by this by Abdul Green back in the 1990s. And he said, Jay, you have no idea what you're talking about. It is not facing south. It is facing we do know, and I said at that time that there was no Qibla on it. He says, yes, there is a Qibla. If you look at the southern portico right there, you will see it talks about Surah 2, Ayah 145. And if you look at the dome up here, there is Surah 17, Ayah 1, which talks about the grace mosque, not Muhammad, but the messenger going from the great mosque to the farthest mosque. That's talking about the Miraj. So therefore, he said, that's the Qibla where that's referring to, because that's both in the Quran and that's from the Quran. I had to get up and I had to say, well, you don't know your history as well. The Dome of the Rock has been destroyed and rebuilt 11 times. That facade that you see here, this facade, that whole dome, this whole structure you're looking here on the outside, was built in 1867, a little over 100 years ago. So a little over 100 years ago, they had to put the Qibla in. But don't say that this is 690. In 690, there has never been a Qibla there. However, I'm going to go back on that. I'm going to lie. You're going to see me why I just lied, because I'm going to completely contradict myself in just a few minutes. Not because I say so, but because Gibson says so. Look at the Umayyad Mosque in Jordan. The Umayyad Mosque, built in 699, we're at the end of the 7th century, it's facing Petra, not Mecca. The Amman Mosque in Jordan in 701, now we're moving into the 8th century. Muhammad died in 632, so now this is a good 70 years later, 60 years later. Look where it's facing. It's facing Petra, not Mecca. The Grand Mosque in Sana'a in Yemen, it's facing Petra in 705. The Qibla al-Minya Mosque in Israel, it's facing Petra. You can see right there, it's not facing Jerusalem, it's not facing Mecca, it's facing Petra. Notice how all of these mosques up until 706, every mosque up until 706, all of the Qiblas face Petra. In Jordan, 600 miles further north, nowhere near Mecca. Look how they all come exactly right to Petra. If you want to look at it from the back, from a distance, as far away as Guangzhou, Wasit, Kufa, Baghdad, India, they all face Petra. This is the coordinates looking from ArchNet. This is a much more accurate form of doing it rather than using Google Earth. You can see they all come. All 17 Petra Qiblas, except for 2, fall within 45 miles of the daughters. These are coming from thousands of miles away. How did they get it so accurate? Look how accurate their Qiblas are. It is not till 706 that we finally get a Qibla that is not Petra, it is not Mecca, it's somewhere in between. And suddenly a new Qibla starts to form. A second Qibla. But it's not Mecca, it's somewhere in between. The Masjid Tariqana, then it goes back in Iran, that's facing Petra in 708. The Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. Now here's what's interesting, because the Al-Aqsa Mosque is built on the same citadel as the Dome of the Rock. Look at the entire citadel. This is built in 709. When you look at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is right here, and you look at the Dome of the Rock, which is right there, and you look at the entire citadel, which is still there standing today, the entire citadel is facing Petra. And you cannot change it unless you destroy it all and rebuild it again. It's not facing Mecca. Even today it's not facing Mecca. And this is built in 709. That's built in 709, that's built in 691. The entire citadel is facing Petra, it's not facing Mecca. The Jami al-Umayyad al-Kabir Mosque in Damascus in Syria, it's facing somewhere in between again. Here's that second Qibla. The Qibla al-Mufjar, Jericho in Israel, is facing Petra in 714. The Amjad Mosque in Bosra, Syria, it's facing Petra. But also in Syria, the Mosque of Umayyad in Bosra, it's facing in between. There's the second Qibla. So now we're getting 2 different Qiblas, but neither of them are Mecca. The Hayat al-Gharbi Mosque in Syria is also facing in between, and it's almost facing in the exact place. In every one of these in-between mosques, they're almost exactly at the same spot. It's not till we get to the Bhangbor Mosque in Pakistan, the first mosque anywhere in the world that faces Mecca. Look at the date, 727. Muhammad died in 632. So according to the Quran, according to the traditions, the canonization of the Qibla was 624. This is over 103 years later. They finally get the first mosque that we've been able to find that's facing Mecca. But then, in 728, the Qasr al-Hayr Mosque in Syria, it's facing in between again, that same spot, somewhere in between. When we get to the Amman Citadel Mosque in Jordan, It's facing Mecca. Here's what's interesting. Look at the date, 730. You have two different mosques here. Here is the earlier mosque, and here is the later mosque. This one is from I think it's 701. Let me get here's another picture, a better picture of it. This one here in Amman, Jordan. This is the 701 mosque. That's facing Petra. Then a new mosque was rebuilt in 730 that's facing Mecca. So there is 30 years between these two mosques. That one's facing Mecca, Petra, that one's facing Mecca. What happened between 701 and 730? That's what we need to answer. Jami al-Zaytuni Mosque in Tunisia. Now we get to North Africa. And when you get to North Africa, you get a fourth Qibla. Not one, not two, not three, but four different Qiblas. Here is what we call the parallel Qiblas. These Qiblas all face parallel to line that goes between Mecca and Petra. A fourth Qibla. The Baalbek Mosque in Lebanon goes back to that in-between Qibla. That's the number 2 Qibla. The Mushta Mosque built in Jordan in 743, it faces back to Petra again, like the earliest mosques. Here you have the Haram Mosque in Turkey. It's in between again, like the second Qibla. So there's Qibla number 2. The Qasr Ukaydir Kufa Mosque, that is finally facing Mecca. Look at the date, 764, so we're now halfway through the 8th century. We get to the Ribat Force, there's the parallel again. That's North Africa. That's the 4th Qibla. The Saudi Ramda Bawra in Oman, that's facing Qibla number 1, the first Qibla, Petra. So there's still mosques being built, even as late as 771, that are facing Petra. Here is the Sumaili Omani Mosque in Oman. It's facing Petra. Look at the date, 771. The Raqqa Mosque that has just been taken over by the coalition forces just this week. It's in Syria. It's somewhere in between, the second Qibla. When you get to Uzbekistan, you can see the Bibi Samarkand Mosque is facing Petra, though some people say it could also face Jerusalem because it goes right through Petra to Jerusalem from that angle. But either way. The Cordoba Mosque in Spain, it's that parallel, that 4th Qibla again. The Jami Uqba, Ibn Nafis, Khud Karouan Mosque in Tunisia, it's that parallel mosque. There it is. All the mosques in North Africa are facing straight south. Not east, not southeast, but straight south. So when you look at these 4 Qiblas, all the Qiblas were facing Petra up until 706. There was a confusion for the next 100 years. 17 of them face Petra, 8 are between, 6 are parallel, and only 10 face Mecca. The Qibla was not finalized towards Mecca until 876, the late 9th century, almost 250 years too late. And from that time on, all the Qiblas. So let's just review what we talked about. This is Qibla number 1. Here it is, all these mosques from all over the world. India, all the way from China, just north of you here, right towards Petra up until 706. All of them, all face there. Then you have a second Qibla, which is even more accurate, that's somewhere in between. See, there's Petra, here's Mecca, it's almost exactly in between. There's something going on here that we need to find out. Then you have the parallel Qiblas. This is the 4th Qibla that parallels the line between Petra and Mecca, and all these North African mosques are facing straight this way. They're not facing this way, they're not facing that way, they're facing straight up and down. It's not till 727 that you first get the first mosque facing Mecca. And it's not till 876, the late 9th century, this is almost 150 years after Muhammad, that finally all the mosques begin to face Mecca. Note which Qiblas are the most accurate. And I've heard many Muslims say, well, yes, that's just because the Arabs didn't know their direction. They were just confused by their direction. They were very primitive. Well, if that were the case, why is it that when you look at all the Petra mosques, they're off by 2.9 degrees. When you look at all the between mosques, they're off by 0.98, less than a degree off. When you look at all the parallel mosques, they're 3.5. And when you look at all the Meccan mosques, they're off by 4.78. If anything, it's the later Qiblas that are the most inaccurate. The ones going to Mecca are the most inaccurate of all the Qiblas. So you can't do that theory anymore. Throw that out the window. Why Petra? Why were all the mosques facing Petra? To do that, you need to look and see where Petra is. Take a look where Petra is. It's right in the center of all the trade. All the trade went to Petra. So what is Petra? Well, it was the sanctuary of the Umayyads. It was a sanctuary before that of the Nabataeans. The Nabataeans were ones that controlled Petra. When you go to Petra today, you will see it's where there are tombs and temples. Any of you have been to Petra? Have any of you had a chance to go there? It's a beautiful place to go. And when you look there, you will see it is all these temples carved out of sheer rock. Beautiful carvings. Whole cities that have been carved out of sheer rock. And it was the center of the Nabataeans. The Nabataeans were there from the 2nd century BC. They controlled that whole area. They were the ones that give us Arabic. Arabic language comes from the Nabataean language. The name for God in Arabic is Allah. Allah is a Nabataean god. Allah is the name of the Nabataean god. They see this, the superior god. Also, Qibla is another name. That's another formal name for Allah. Interestingly, the Nabataean Allah has a wife named Alat and Al-Uzza, which means Allah has a wife. I had no idea. Which means the Nabataean Allah is a pagan god and a polytheistic god. So when Muslims say that Allah is one, then I would like to know what they're going to do with the Nabataean Allah, which is where they got the name from. Do you see the problem with using the name Allah? It's the wrong name. It's a pagan name. It's a polytheistic name. It's a pre-Islamic name. It is not a Christian name. It is not a biblical name. The name for God in the Bible is not Allah. It is Yahweh. Yahweh has no wife, but Yahweh has a son. Isn't that interesting? Make sure you get the right name. What's fascinating to me is that most Muslims here tonight should know where Alat and Al-Uzza are, because that's in the Quran, in Surah 53, ayah 19 to 20. Am I not correct, Tariq? In Surah 53, ayah 19 to 20, you have reference to Alat, Al-Manat, and Al-Uzza. These are known as the Satanic verses. These are the 3 goddesses that supposedly Muhammad introduced into the Quran. Satan supposedly seduced him by letting those verses in, and that's why Gabriel, when he moved to Medina, says to take out those verses. He took out those verses, but he left the 3 names there, and they're still there today. And this is the Satanic verses that Salman Rushdie made famous in his book called The Satanic Verses. Every Muslim scholar knows about these Satanic verses. Now we know where Alat and Al-Uzza come from. These are the 2 goddesses who have the same name that is the wife. Alat is the feminine form of Allah. That's why it makes sense now. That's why Allah is the wrong God. Whoever put the Quran together should never have used that name and never have said this God is one. Because Alat and Al-Uzza and Allah all belong to the same God and his family. Now, when you look at Petra, take a look at Petra. Petra is in a valley. It has a parallel valley. There you can see the valley. You can see the parallel valley. It has a stream going right through it. It has a number of streams. It has field. It has tree. It has grass. It has clay. It has loam. It has olive trees. Everything that we see in the Quran about this city where this prophet comes from fits Petra. Not one of these geographical locations fits Mecca. Petra has all the items listed in the Quran. Thus, could Petra be the place that the Quran is referring to? When we look at Petra even more closely, we find that the people in Ud, which are mentioned 23 times in the Quran, the people from Thabud, which are mentioned 24 times, and the people from Midian, who are mentioned 7 times, all are around Petra. Now can you see why this prophet had so much contact with these people from these cities? Because he was right next door to them. If he'd been way down here, he'd have to take a helicopter every day to meet them. They didn't have helicopters back then. That's why you have to make sure that if you're going to look at the historical record, you've got to get the right man in the right place, doing the right thing at the right time. It looks like they don't have any of that. Now, the significance of that, nothing is known about Muhammad until the late 7th century from within Arab sources. His biography, the Sirah, and his sayings, the Hadith, did not appear until the 9th century. His city, Mecca, isn't referred to until the 8th century. Thus, much of what we know of Muhammad is either written down hundreds of years later and hundreds of miles away. It looks like he is nothing more than a later redaction. He's been put back by the later writers and imposed into the wrong place. It looks like he's nothing more than a redaction, possibly by Abd al-Malik. Why do I bring up Abd al-Malik? He is highly significant. Humphreys looks back and he says, Islam and the Prophet's life as we know it was not derived from the 7th century, but evolved over a period of 200 to 300 years and redacted back on the Prophet's life and compiled possibly in the 9th century. Now, let's summarize, and then we're going to come and bring it all to a conclusion. New books and documentaries are being published with question the classical account of Islam's beginning. Why are there no Muslim sources for 200 years? That's the first question. Why do the claims they make not fit the historical record? Why are all the geographical references so few and confused? Why do they all seem much further north? They're not in the right place. They've got the wrong person at the wrong place. Why are there so many references to vegetation which would not exist in Mecca at that time? Why is Mecca not mentioned until 741, nor included in any map until the 900s? Why is Mecca not on the trade route? Why do all the Qiblas face Petra for the first 100 years, then are confused to the next 100, and aren't standardized to Mecca until 822, 200 years too late? Therefore, much of what we know about early Islam is in doubt. So, what really happened? What is going on? Now, I'm not going to stand here and tell you I know what happened. We don't know yet. This is all coming out in just this last year. There's an awful lot yet we need to start looking at. We need to know on why is it there's 4 different Qiblas. What's interesting, these 4 are exact. They are absolutely the same Qiblas, and that shows that there is something happening politically. What we can, and only what I'm going to do now, is what we think is happening, okay? And a year from now, it might be completely changed. Because as we're now digging more, as we're going there, as we're looking out more, we're starting to get more and more information all the time. This is brand new, so everything you're hearing today is the first time you've heard it. This is why it's now sprinkling down, getting into the academia. The academics are very interested in what's happening here, because for the first time, we're getting an entire different narrative than what Islam has been telling us, not for 1400 years, but for 1300 years. And that's why what I'm going to say next is nothing more than supposition. Okay, let me repeat that. It's nothing more than what we think has went on so far at this time. What we need to do is we need to look at what we do know, and what we do know is the Umayyads did exist. The Umayyads were a very real empire. They did begin in 661. We don't know beforehand where they came from. We do know that they were headquartered in Damascus. Now that's the first problem. Why in Damascus? Way up north. If they were Muslims, why weren't they headquartered down in Medina or Mecca? Why has no one asked this question? Damascus is not just 600 miles away, it's over 1,000 miles away. We also know that their sanctuary was Petra. That the Umayyad sanctuary was Petra, it was never Mecca, it was always Petra. That's why Petra is such a great city, and that's why it is talked about, there's so much reference to it. But we do know that Abdullah ibn Zubair was the governor of Petra, and he rebelled against the Umayyads. In fact, he rebelled against the Sufyan, the Marwanid family, in 683, against the father of Abdul Malik. He rebelled against him, and what he did, he destroyed the Kaaba in Petra. Did you hear me say Kaaba? Yes, there were Kaabas in every major city. There is not just one Kaaba. That's another thing Muslims haven't told us. We have been looking at reference after reference. Almost every major city had a Kaaba. But these were Nabataean Kaabas. Isn't that fascinating? Zubair, when he left, he rebelled against the Marwanids. He destroyed the Kaaba in 683 against the Umayyad power in Damascus. He destroys the Kaaba in Petra and takes the black stone with him. The black stone, where have we heard about the black stone before? Where is it today? It's in Mecca. It's in the Kaaba. It's in the northeast corner of the Kaaba, encased in silver. What in the world is that black stone doing in the middle of the Kaaba? Remember, Muslims are not supposed to pray to anything. There is no other God but God. What in the world is a black stone doing in the holiest place of all of Islam? And why do Muslims kiss it? See, I've asked this for so many Muslims, and no Muslim can give me a response. I will tell you the reason, because this is a Nabataean custom. The Nabataeans believed that wherever the black stone was, God's presence was there. Why? Because this was a meteorite that came from the heavens. They saw it come from the heavens, and therefore they worshipped it. So Zubair takes the black stone with him, and by taking the black stone with him, he takes God's presence with him. This was a huge affront to the Umayyads. That's why they came from Damascus to come and destroy Zubair. By the time they got there, one of their own died. So Abdul Malik at this time had to return home quickly, and he had to go back up to Damascus again. We know that from history. That's all in the history. Now you can see by looking at the map here, Damascus is way up here, Mecca is way down here, Petra is right here, Why in the world would they, if this is their sanctuary for all of their theology, why would they make their political office way up here and not down here? Muslims have not looked at history. But hold on a minute. We know nothing about this part of history from Islam. Remember? History only begins to appear in the 9th century. We'll come back to that. So Abd al-Malik, who reigns from 685 to 705, that's well documented. Way up in Damascus, not Medina, not Mecca. He needs an Arab identity. He realizes that he has to have an Arab identity. They had taken over Basra, Baghdad, Damascus, Jerusalem, and Cairo by 652. So for 40 years now, they now control these great cities of the Levant. By this time, they moved all the trade across North Africa, all the way up to Andalusia, which is Spain. And they moved all the way over to the east, over to India. So from India over to Spain, all that land was under their control. But they do not have any identity. They had to make it, because many of them were nomadic, they didn't even know how to run cities. They had to have the Jews and the Christians run the cities for them. And the reason they chose Jews and Christians, because they both were brothers from Abraham. They were both part of the Al-Kitab. The problem was, the Jews and Christians had a prophetic line. The Jews and the Christians had a book. They were part of the Al-Kitab. The Arabs had no book. They had no prophet. For 40 years, they have been the political heads, and that's why Abd al-Malik, very curiously, Abd al-Malik needs to have this Arab identity. How do you create an Arab identity that is greater than the Jews and the Christians that you're dependent on, that you are also in competition with? Because the great empire of the day at that time was the Byzantine Empire. That was the Christian Empire. How can you defeat the Christian Empire and create your own identity that's equal or better to theirs? What do? Abd al-Malik comes up with a plan, and you can see what he does. The coins, if you look at the coins in the British numismatic section, you will see that these are the Byzantine dinar. You look, there is the emperor with two retainers on either side. On the back side of the coin is the Byzantine cross. So it's very clear this is a Christian coin. Now, in order for them to trade, once the Arabs take over power there in 661, once the Umayyad dynasty comes forth, they have to have coins that they can trade with the Byzantines. So what do? They create these Sufyani dirhams. And there is, instead of the emperor, they now have the caliph. They have the Umayyad and his two retainers. And they now, instead of the Byzantine cross, they take the cross piece off, so it's not a cross, but it's still recognizable as the same coin. That's how they can now trade with their neighbors. But since when are Muslims allowed to have images on coins? This is obviously nothing to do with Islam. This is long before Islam. But this is 660, this is 670, this is 680, this is up until 685. This is supposedly the first Muslim empire. Who in the world, and what Muslim empire would ever have images on their coins? And the cross on the backside of it. Why haven't we been told this? Then you get to Abd al-Malik, and he coins this coin of himself. There he is on the coin. This is 685 to 705 that he was in power. Then in 691, he takes off these coins and he introduces these coins in 692. Take a look. He takes all the images off, no longer has image, so something happens in 691 and he introduces this coin. Take a look what's on the coin. The Shahada. There is only one God but God, and Muhammad is the prophet of God. This is the first time we see Muhammad's name anywhere on any documentation, introduced by Abd al-Malik in 692. Muhammad died in 632. His name didn't appear prior to 692. For 60 years, we've not seen his name anywhere until Abd al-Malik introduces it on these coins. At the same time, he then entered and builds this Dome of the Rock in 691, the year before. I'm sorry, did I say it was the first time it was introduced? Actually, it was introduced a year before. And that building, we'll get to that. He builds this building, the greatest structure of its day, in the middle of Jerusalem. Why do you build it in Jerusalem? Why don't you build it in Damascus? And if Mecca existed, why don't you build it in Mecca? Well, because there was no Mecca. There's no reference to any Mecca at all, not until 741, and we're still back in 691. So what does he do? Take a look at what he does. He builds it above the Church of the Sepulchre. There's the Church of the Sepulchre in Jerusalem, which is the theological head for all Christianity. He takes it and he builds it along the hill above it, looking down onto it, basically saying, we are the new men in town. We are now going to build the largest structure of our day, looking down upon you Christians, and we're going to do something significant with this building. It's the greatest building of its time. That's why it's still there today. Take a look at it. When you go to Jerusalem, you have to see it. It's one of the most beautiful buildings even today. But look and see what he does. He doesn't just build the building. He uses the same Byzantine architecture, so it's a one-upmanship because he's using the same Byzantine architecture as the Christians, but a much larger and a more prominent structure in the holiest city of Jews and Christians, basically saying, we're the new men in town. That's why he didn't build in Damascus, and the reason he didn't build in Mecca, because Mecca didn't even exist at that time. It is because of the Miraj. Is this because of the Miraj? This is what Muslims tell me today, that it was built because of the Miraj. Well, I would like to know. If that was so, then there's something written about it, right? So what you need to do, you need to go back to the only part of the Dome of the Rock that is original. See, the building's been destroyed and rebuilt 11 times. Did I tell you that earlier? And the only part of the building that still exists today are these two inner ambulatories. Both these two, that one there and this one here. That's the only original part of the building that still exists today. And when you look at those ambulatories, you need to look at the inscriptions. You need to look at the inscriptions up there and the inscriptions up here. Those are the original part of the inscriptions from 691. Take a look at them. They are written in Arabic. And look and see what they say. This is the first Quranic material we see anywhere in the world. This is the first Quranic material that has come to light. And it's on the Dome of the Rock. So what do you say? You have Surah 4, Ayah 171. O people of the Scripture, do not exaggerate in your religion, nor utter aught concerning Allah, save the truth. The Messiah, Jesus, son of Mary, was only a messenger of Allah, and his word which he conveyed unto Mary, and his spirit for him. So believe in Allah and his messenger, and say not three. Cease. It is better for you, Allah is one and only God, for is it far removed from his transcendent majesty that he should have a son. Who is that attacking? That's attacking the Trinity, that's attacking Jesus, that's attacking his divinity and his sonship. All four in one. That's why Surah 4, 171 is the earliest Quranic reference we have, and it's right there on the Dome of the Rock. Surah 17, Ayah 111. Praise be to God who hath not taken unto him a son. Who's that attacking? Jesus again. And who hath no partner. Who's that attacking? Supposedly the fact that Jesus is the partner of God. Nor hath he any protecting friend through dependence. And then we get to the mother lode. This is the big verse. There is no God but God. He is one. He has no associate. Now that's not part of the Shahada today. That was a piece that was added in the Shahada that no longer exists today. So even the Shahada is not the same. He is God, the one, God, the eternally besought of all. He begetteth not, nor was begotten. Who's that attacking? Jesus again. And there is none comparable to him. Muhammad is the messenger of God. This is the first time we see Muhammad's name introduced on the Dome of the Rock in 691 on Surah 12, which later became Surah 12. We now know today is Surah 12. It wasn't then. There was no Surah titles. There was no reference. Fascinating. They finally got their own prophet, built on the largest building of its day. Abdul Malik introduces his Arab identity, beginning with the Dome of the Rock. It's larger than any other non-Arab structure. It's facing the Arab sanctuary Petra. It incorporates inscriptions against Byzantine Christianity. It introduces their faith. That's where you see the word Islam first introduced. That's where you see the people Muslim introduced. And that's where you see their prophet Muhammad introduced. At the same time, and this is Yehuda Nevo, Dr. Yehuda Nevo did a research on all the protocols. These are the official documents put out by the Caliph. From the Sufyani period, from 661, every one of the Caliphal protocols say nothing about Muhammad, say nothing about Islam. There's no reference to people called Muslim, and there's no reference to any book called the Quran. Now that's rather curious. If these are the first Muslims, and these are the original documents, these are the official documents of the Caliphs of the Sufyani family, why don't they say the three most important things? Why don't they talk about who they are? Why don't they talk about their faith? Why don't they talk about the book? And why don't they talk about the man? The book and the man are completely missing. Dr. Yehuda never noticed there's even a Bismillah now, but the Bismillah is not the same Bismillah we use today. These protocols continue year after year from 660 up into 670, 680. By the time you get to 691, when Abdul Malik's prayer protocols, he says in almost overnight, suddenly, the Shahada is introduced. There is only one God but God. He has no associates. Muhammad is his prophet. It is introduced the same time that the Dome of the Rock is built. Simultaneously, the same time that this is introduced on the coins. So Abdul-Malik not only introduces it on the caliphal protocols, he introduces it on the Dome of the Rock, he also introduces it on the coins. He is now creating an Arab identity. Now they have a prophet, their own prophet. But in order to have a prophet, you have to get a book. Every prophet has to have a revelation. And here's the problem. There is no book. Can you now understand why all the earliest Qurans begin to appear after Abdul-Malik, or during the time of Abdul-Malik? And that's why the Tokapi, the Samarkand, the Ma'il, the Petroponus, the Sana manuscript, the Husseini manuscript, are all begin to appear in the 8th and 9th century. And that's why every one of these manuscripts starts getting manipulated. Every one of these manuscripts is incomplete. Not one of them agrees with each other. They do not agree with the Quran we have today. Why? Because you have 4 different schools of manuscripts. You have one school up in Damascus that is known as the Umayyad bin Ka'b's manuscript codex. You have another school in Basra that's known as Ibn Musa's codex. You have another school in Baghdad that's known as is known as Ibn Mas'ud's codex. And then you have another codex that comes out of Medina that's known as Zayd ibn Thabit's. 4 different codices. Not one of them agrees with each other. But reference after reference that these are vying for ascendancy. And that's why all of this happens in the 8th century. None of it happens in the 7th century. You've got the building. The earliest Quranic texts are on the Dome of the Rock in 691. The earliest Quranic manuscripts, but they don't even agree with the Quran we have today. The earliest Quranic manuscripts begin to appear during his reign and his son Al-Walid, and on and on. None of them are complete. None of them parallel today's Quran. They continue to be changed and corrected by later caliphs. We saw that on Wednesday. So what is happening? You have 2 empires that are competing. The sanctuary in Petra is destroyed by an earthquake in 730. That's well documented. And when an earthquake comes and destroys a sanctuary, God's presence leaves. This is well known in ancient medieval times. Thus, a new place is needed. That's why Mecca had to be chosen. Possibly chosen by the rebel Abdul al-Zubair and those from Kufa. The Kufa over in Persia. Remember, you have Abdul-Malik and the Umayyads up in Damascus. Over in Baghdad, you have another group that are hated by the Umayyads. They are the Abbasids. The Abbasids hate the Umayyads hate the Abbasids. The Abbasids are part of the Persian hegemony. Persians were destroyed by the Arabs, and that's why they hated them so much. So they were already vying for ascendancy. So you can see already Zubair then joins with the Persians when he takes the Black Stone and he rebels in 687. The Abbasids and Zubair create their sanctuary in Mecca, then demand allegiance. All those Qiblas facing Mecca are theirs. But their first mosque that is even built is not till 727, 100 years after Muhammad died. So here you have one group that are now creating a whole new sanctuary. The political head is in Baghdad, but they don't have, in every case, you never have the political center the same as the religious center. That's why the Umayyads have their political center up in Damascus, but the religious center is in Petra, because that's the Nabataean center for the sanctuary. So here you have the Abbasids have to have a new sanctuary. According to some references, it looks like Zubair came from Mecca. That's probably why Mecca was chosen. But that's why it has no history. There is no history there. There is nothing that goes back. That's why they can't find any artifacts. Al-Hajjaj also rebels. He is the governor in 705. He rebels, and it looks like it is his mosque, which are facing between the other 2 sanctuaries. So that's why you get a second Qibla, because you have another rebellion. This is a political rebellion. Those in North Africa and Andalusia don't show allegiance to either empire, so they have mosques facing parallel to each sanctuary. So then you get a 4th Qibla. Now you have 4 different Qiblas, 4 different political situations, two different empires who are vying for ascendancy. Can you then understand why you have 4 different directions? When the Abbasids finally overpower the Umayyads in 749, they become the new power. Most of all the Qiblas then face Mecca with few holdouts until 822 when they all face Mecca. And from that time on, every mosque has faced Mecca. Basically, what you have here is you have a political tug of war going on. This makes sense. That's exactly what happens. And depending on who you support, if you support the Umayyad, then your mosque in your city faces Petra. If you support the Abbasids, then your mosque facing where in your city faces Mecca. Or if you don't like either, you face somewhere in between. Now that the Muslims have a prophet, Muhammad, a revelation, the Quran, a sanctuary, Mecca, they need a history. Can you then understand why this man's history doesn't get written down until the 9th century? It takes him another 100 years to finally get it written down. And then his hadith don't get written down until the late 9th century. See, this is what's curious. No one's ever bothered to answer this question. Why was Bukhari given 600,000 of these sayings and he throws away 98% of them? There must be an agenda there. Obviously, he only retained 2% because these are the only 2% that fit their narrative. That's why there was a manipulation that continues for 200 years. Once the hadith got started to compile, then the tafsir, then they got to start translating and making sense of this book. And that's why the commentaries don't even begin to appear to the 10th century. By the 9th century, they have a book, the man, the place, and the story. A new religion is formed and growing, yet it did not happen within a period of 22 years. It evolved from a period of 200 to 300 years. So what about Muhammad? Since much of what we know about early Islam is in doubt, since much of the Quran is also in doubt, since nothing is known of Muhammad until the late 7th century, or Mecca until the 8th century, or his story until the 9th century, hundreds of years later and hundreds of miles away, can we conclude that Islam is nothing more than a later redaction, possibly begun by Abdul Malik, then continued by his descendants, proving Muhammad had nothing to do with the Quran? So who is he and what is his purpose? It looks like the Muslims have the wrong man at the wrong place, doing the wrong thing at the wrong time. What about Jesus? We know where Jesus was born, in Bethlehem. That's not dispute. We know where Jesus grew up, in Nazareth. That's not in dispute. We know where Jesus died, and when, in Jerusalem. That's not in dispute. We know what Jesus did, the last 3 years especially. That's not in dispute. We know from eyewitness accounts exactly what he said and what he did, from Matthew and John himself. We know from hostile accounts, even from Thallus and Tacitus and Josephus, these are Greek, Roman, and Jewish historians, exactly when he died and where he died. We know when they were written, between 15 to 60 years later. Few doubt his historicity today. Thus we have the right man at the right place, doing the right thing at the right time. So where do we go from here? Historians set the stage, we move it on. The questions they ask, we research and expand. We must confront Islam's historical foundations. We must challenge Muhammad in the Quran. We must demand the same of all books, not just our Bible, but also Jesus Christ himself. We must bring both into the public sphere and then let people come to their own conclusions. Why? Because similar historical questions have already been asked of Christianity, and every one of them have been answered. We need to bring our friends home. I open it up to questions.
Thank you, Jim, for your presentation. I appreciate very much. It's very good. I'm Bernard from Solid Rock Church. Just would like to ask about the claim of some interfaith dialogue between Muslim and Christians, mostly when they speak about the word Allah. It's come from the word Allah, which is referring to the Peshitta text in the 1st century. I mean, they're saying that the claim of the histories on the winners. So it seems like, correct me if I'm wrong, but based upon your presentation, it's much more on the Western flavor of historical construction. So what do you think about the connection with the Peshitta text of the word Allah with the Medina Charter, that most of the Muslim claim that this is the proof, the evidence of existence of Muhammad and in a multi-pluralistic society?
I'm sorry, I'm not getting that last question. What would I make? Pull it away from your mouth a bit. You're just too much.
Yeah, what I'm saying is there any historical connection between the claim, which is many of the Christians and Muslim interfaith dialogue, when they're always referring to the Peshitta text? Yeah, it was mostly the Martuma Orthodox, so they are referring to that manner as doing the constructive of the word Allah into the word Allah, which is referring to the 1st century of the written of this text.
Okay, and let me see if I could get your question right. Is the Allah or Elohim, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah.
The Elohim is the same as Allah.
Yeah.
I have no problem with that. I think that's exactly what your question is. Is that not therefore the name for Allah in the first century?
No, my question is there any connection from the historical evidence, because the Martoma Syrian Orthodox Church already in the first time of the first century, they already exist, and the Bible is already canonized within their hands. And this is becoming the base whereby the Muslim and the Christian, when they have interfaith dialogue, they're referring into this manner. They're always looking to the Eastern source for that.
Are you from the Martoma Church?
No, I'm a Pentecostal evangelical
that's
church.
fine. But is there any text from the Martoma Church that's 2,000 years old?
Yeah, that is Peshitta. Until now.
Peshitta is from the 4th century. It's not from the 1st century.
No, it already exists until now, the Martoma Orthodox Church.
The Martoma make lots of claims that they cannot support. I don't know of any Martoma codex that is from the 1st century.
Which is much more older than the presentation of Muslim. They are older than even
Listen, okay. Let's agree.
I just would like ask your preference and your comment about
Let me ask you this, sir. Do you know where the oldest Peshitta is?
Yeah, of course. It's in Syria. It's a Jordan, in a sense.
It's not. It's actually in Dublin. It's in the Chester Beatty manuscripts.
The claim of colonization in the London Museum has been refuted by mostly of the...
Sir, do you believe that the oldest... Are you suggesting that...
That's okay. You can claim your source. What I'm saying is, what is your comment on the word of the Peshitta, which is in the 1st century, that becoming the reference for the Muslim and...
I don't believe it is the 1st century. It's a 4th century document. It is Syriac. That is true.
Can you
give
me your historical, the first-hand sources about these things?
4th century I can, but not 1st century. I'm asking you.
So you're also doubting that the word Allah in the Peshitta text is not in the 1st century?
4th century. Am I being clear? It's the 4th century. It's not 1st century.
Can you recommend any document?
There is no document from the 1st century, sir. We don't even have a biblical document from the 1st century.
Oh no, you're referring to the biblical. What I'm saying is that your secular source in the first-hand source that you as a historian, as apologist can claim. I mean, I would like to know that. Where do you get the first-hand source?
Very simple. Let me say it again. I've now said it 5 times. The earliest Peshitta, which is Syriac document, the Peshitta is amalgamation of the 4 Gospels.
Yeah.
Okay? It was written by Tatian. Tatian lived in the late 3rd century.
Yeah.
So how could it be a 1st century document?
Oh, no, you're referring to the Peshitta. That's why I claim. From the Peshitta into your modern time, is there any intermediate first-hand source that can claim this Peshitta? The Peshitta text or the Martoma Orthodox here, we have this handed down until this very...
I can imagine the Martoma will say, because I'm from India, I know that every Indian likes to exaggerate, but there has been no Indian reference.
That's why my senses is...
So are you a Martoman?
No.
So why are you defending the Martomans?
Well, we read as a pastor, we have to know the sources, right?
Very clearly.
Yeah.
I would ask you to go back to the Martoma, which is the church in Kerala. The Martoma, they do believe that Thomas went to Kerala. I don't sit there and doubt that. What I do doubt is that they can produce a text from the 1st century.
The reconstruction for language of philologies of Syrian, Eastern Syria and Western Syria has been claimed by many historians.
Give me one name of one historian that claims it.
Oh yeah, Arnold J. Toynbee has already stated.
Toynbee?
Yeah.
When did Toynbee die? In the 1800s. You're talking about somebody that is not even part of modern history. Okay, so whether we get it, what your question is let's assume that the earliest Syriac Peshitta that we have today is in the is in the Chester Beatty manuscript, is in the Chester Beatty library.
I don't think so. The Western keep the Western.
Sir,
the Eastern.
I don't know of any scholar that would agree with what you just said.
I appreciate your presentation.
Yeah.
You're much more flavor on the Western view on Islam. But
the question is, the Allah that's in the Peshitta, is that the same as the Allah in the Quran?
I appreciate. That's why I want to know your preferences on the word of Allah and Allah in the Peshitta.
I would have no difficulty believing it is, but is it the same God? Is it the same name as Yahweh?
We are not talking about the theory of transliteration of the Bible.
I'm talking about
what I'm saying is some in Islamic and the Christians, when they have interfaith dialogue, they always revert. That is my first introduction when I'm
sorry, does everybody follow what his question is? I'm not following his question.
No.
What is your question then?
Then my question is, how do you view about the Peshitta text
Right.
about the word Allah in the first century is already within their hands in the traditions of oral, which is now being referred by some of the
Oh,
Christians.
okay. So let's forget about the Peshitta. Let's just talk about the name Allah. I'm sure Allah existed. It existed from the 2nd century BC. The Nabataeans' God's name is Allah.
Yeah, my question
So
is not
if-
finished. What I'm saying is,
Yeah.
this is the basis that which is some Islam claim that they have the historical evidence and existence about the Median
Okay.
Charter. You know,
Okay.
I just wanted to see what your view.
What's your name, by the way?
I'm Bernard.
Bernard, I would
Yeah.
suggest, yes, go ahead and say that. And what I would say to those Muslims is be careful, because what you're doing is you're actually falling into the trap of admitting that Allah, that your God Allah, is actually pre-Islamic. He is pre-Islamic. I said that already earlier tonight, did I not? He is a Nabataean God. That means that name has been around since the 2nd century BC. Nabataeans were the ones that gave Allah its language. The Arabic language comes from the Nabataean language. It is the precursor to Arabic. So it would not surprise me. I'm going to dispute you on the date of the text, but it would not surprise me that the name itself has always been around since the 2nd century BC, and it is a pagan Nabataean god. So if Muslims want to claim that this is the God that they have in their Quran, they can have that God. I don't want that God, because that God has a wife named Alat. That means that already you have a duality in the Godhead. So how can that God be one if he has a wife? Ooh, I love that. Because that completely confronts Surah 6, Ayah 101, which says that God cannot have us consort. If whoever put the Quran together had known that, they would never have chosen the name Allah. They would never have gone to the Nabataeans for their God. They should have gone to the Jews and Christians, who were their next door neighbors, to go to the real name for God, Yahweh. Because Yahweh does not have a wife. Yahweh is one, has always been. For 3,400 years we've known about that name. Since Moses received that name in Exodus 3, verse 14 and 15. That's the name that they should have used, and you will not find that name in this book. If that name, the personal name for God, the eternal name for God, the holy name for God, the eternal name that even today Jews will not repeat audibly, if that name is not in this book, then how can Muhammad claim to be a prophet if he didn't even know God's personal name? He didn't even know what God he was representing. And I would suggest that Muslims must be careful about pushing the name Allah, because Allah is a pagan God, a polytheistic God, and is not the one God that we're looking for. Okay?
Thank you.
Let's give
At the very back. Before Tariq, let's hear a film with film.
Okay.
Thanks very much, Jay. Again, really lots of new information. This history seems very, very complex. When we look at the classic interpretation, the classic histories of the Quran, there does seem to be a sort of Quranic development in the beginning. The early Meccan verses are very peaceful. Muhammad goes in the Hijrah to Medina. He builds up a great following, and the verses become more aggressive and warlike. And then finally, of course, he comes back to Mecca. So that there seems to be a history there. And from what you said today, Abu Malik seems to have constructed a history around Muhammad, but there does seem to be a real history. Muhammad seems to have been a real person. You got all these stories about him, so there must be a history there.
Real quickly, Phil, is
Yeah.
the name Muhammad in the Quran more than 4 times?
No.
So who is that man that they keep referring to
Well,
as this Rasul, the representative, the
Yeah.
prophet of God? Who do you think that person may be?
So my
Even in the modern day Quran,
Yeah.
the modern day Quran.
my sort of question would be, well, where did all these hadith come from? With the prophet said this. Who is the prophet? What, in your understanding?
Let me answer that with 2 different ways of
All
saying
right.
that.
Okay.
First and foremost, if you look at the Quran, how was the Quran constructed? It was not constructed by chronology. It was not.
Yes.
We know that. Even Muslims tell us that it was constructed by size.
By size, yeah.
So the smallest ones first, the largest ones first, the smallest ones later.
Right.
If you're going to construct a book that supposedly is about God, which the smallest verses are all about God. There's very little there about Muhammad in the Meccan surahs.
Okay.
It's all about God up here, man down here, and how we must obey and submit to God. There's an awful lot in the Meccan surahs that we can accept. That really would sound like a book that was written for as a revelation for the people of the book. That's why we can accept so much of the Meccan revelation. It's when you get to the larger, the longer material now, when you start realizing that you're going to have to start giving this man authority. You're going to have to make sure that this man is this prophet, whatever his name is. Then you start writing a lot more about his life. Did you notice that?
Okay.
You start writing about his wives in Surah 33. You start writing about his conflicts and all the difficult. Then you start getting into many of the rules and regulations. And that's why the Medinan surahs, which are much longer, are much more ingrained. Then they are trying to construct it. I would suggest that this has nothing to do with chronology. This has everything to do with trying to create and trying to make sure that there are rules and regulations for every area of life. That's why they are so much longer. That would make sense then, that why they were put in that order. Now that's just me speaking. I'm not going to say other scholars may disagree with us. But what I find fascinating is, now can you understand why there's so many contradictions in the Quran?
Sure.
Because if you're creating it and you're manipulating and you're moving it around and you're getting and you're borrowing it, and because of the fact that so many of the stories in the Quran are borrowed anyways, 25% of the Quran, we know exactly where those stories come from. They are not Arab stories, they are not Nabataean stories. Most of them are Jewish apocryphal accounts and Byzantine, Christian, Syriac, Gnostic writings. Now, if that is the case, you can understand they all come much later, because that means they have to be borrowed, but they borrowed the wrong stories. If you're talking, then you get to the other part of the Quran, which is the poetry. 30% of the Quran is beautiful poetry. Almost every one of those strophes of poetry are from Christian hymns. Written in the 5th and 6th century, written in Syriac, interposed into Arabic in the 7th or 8th or 9th century. So it's an amalgamation of many different stories, many different traditions, and also the most important is the Medina, because then there you use the Quran to then give authority to this prophet who is named in 691. So the name is there. Why is the name not in the Quran? There's no excuse for it. Unless they still had not decided in the Quran yet, they had not decided what they're going to do with this prophet. And that's why it takes so long for them to write his traditions. Now you say, where did all these hadith come from? Look at the date, 870. That's 240 years later.
Right.
And where did the 600 Akbar come from? I would suggest it comes from many different traditions, and that's why Al-Bukhari was given the job to whittle them away and throw 98% out. Wouldn't it have been nice if he had kept those 98% so we could look at them today? Because then I would suggest we would know an awful lot more about that culture, about that time, and why they were thrown out.
So you think the hadith of Sahih al-Bukhari are about a prophet, and later his name is
by the time they do write his story in 833, it is Muhammad. That's no doubt. Everything about the Siddha is about him.
Okay.
But see, that's another 100 years after the Quran was already put together. See, the Quran didn't have that benefit. So that's why, is it not, to me, it makes all the sense in the world that the Siddha and the Hadith and the Tafsir are another 100 to 150 years later. But you can imagine, before they even got to that, there was a multiplicity of many different variations. And we're seeing that as well. And that's why you have Al-Bukhari and Al-Sahih Muslim don't agree with each other on many of their traditions. By the time you get to the 10th century, good old Al-Tabari, one of the things we love about Al-Tabari, he writes everybody's story. He puts them all together, all these contradicting stories. And he assumes the reader is going to do the job of deciding which is true and which is not true. That's why we love Al-Tabari, because he doesn't even care if they conflict. He's probably the most honest amongst them.
Okay. Well,
okay?
Thank you.
I don't want to ask any question, but I want to say something. First is about the name of Allah. The name of Allah is not sourced from any pagan god or some other place. The Arabic word is Ilah. Ilahun means is the personality we worship him. And when we say Al, it's like the there is one book and we say the book, the special book. So when we use alif lam with ilahun, it means al ilahun and it change into Allah. So it means the special personality we worship to him, and it is not belong to any other source, and it is very clearly Muslims believe that God has no wife, so there cannot be contradiction. So it is.
Let me respond to that real quickly. Tariq, and for those who don't know, Tariq has been to every one of these meetings, and we love him because he loves to sit there and he loves to try to confront me on this. So let me answer that very quickly. What does Allah mean in Arabic? Does it mean?
The personality, the special personality we worship for him. God.
Now you're putting personality on because you're trying to find
God.
Does he have 99 names?
Yes, they are not.
Do those names describe who he is? Do those names describe who he is? His attributes. Okay. In any of those 99 names, are any one of them Yahweh?
No, I don't know.
Wait a minute. Stop and think that through. Are you all following what I'm doing here? Can you see, if every prophet had one name for God that was used right through 3,400 years, for 3,400 years, for 1,400 years, there was always one name for God that every prophet used. That was Yahweh. That's the name that would define which God we were talking about. That's the name that Moses needed to go down to Egypt so the children of Israel know what God he represented. That's why Moses said, "What is your name?" He didn't want Allah, the God. That's not a name. That's a title. Can you imagine me being an ambassador coming to Hong Kong? I said this earlier this morning, and I come to the authority here in Hong Kong. I'm the ambassador for the United States, and I want to come and I want to introduce and give you my credentials as being the ambassador. And you as a politician say, well, okay, so you're the ambassador, and who are you representing? I'm representing the president. Okay, and what's his name? Well, I don't know his name, but he's the president. What kind of ambassador would I be if I don't even know my president's name? What kind of prophet is Muhammad if he doesn't even know the name of God? The God is not a name. It is a title. So that's why we've been asking this. I've been asking for 35 years. You've got to do better than Allah, especially when you know that name is a Nabataean name, it is a pre-Islamic name, it is a pagan name, and it is a polytheistic name. And that God, Allah, does have a wife. Now, don't say he doesn't have a wife. That's because you're just following what your Quran says. You're mimicking your Quran. But you've got to, Tariq, you've got to start looking at this historically. Don't just tell me what you know. Because you're just going to tell me what you've been taught. Listen to what we're saying.
You are a historian. I'm not a historian. I'm
so
telling
that
what is my belief, that Allah is a personal name and other names are attributive names.
Does anybody in this room believe that Allah is a personal name?
No, but we have Muslim beliefs. We Muslim beliefs.
Well, I know you have to believe.
We believe. So how we explain, you should accept that how we believe.
Listen, I know you believe that.
You cannot force us to believe like this.
Okay. Tariq, you still haven't answered me. Tariq,
please listen me.
You still haven't answered me. Why didn't Muhammad know God's personal name? The real personal name that you'll find 6,823 times in the Old Testament, the name that every prophet used, the name that Jesus used. And when he used it, the Jews took stones to stone him because he, a pure man, was claiming that name for himself. Why is that name not found here?
Smith, I cannot understand all English. My English is vague, but I want to say something what I can understand.
Okay.
And I don't need to
Can
debate.
You answer that question?
I don't need debate. Okay,
Tariq,
I want to explain you
question?
because I am feeling that they cannot be misguided. They should know how we Muslim believe. We believe that Allah has no wife. Allah is his personal name and other names are his attributes name. Okay, one thing. The second, you say that Quran was not composed in a chronical order. It was composed by size. Quran was not composed in a chronicle. Yes. The second, Quran was not composed by size. It is wrong. The first surah is very small, only 7 verses. But the next surah is very long surah.
Tariq, I'm going to jump on the real quickly.
You listen me. No, I don't want to debate. I don't want to debate.
I'm going to jump real quick since you brought it up. Have you looked at any of the earliest manuscripts? No, you haven't. I don't know you haven't. Is the Fatiha in any of those manuscripts? No, it isn't. It is not in the top copy. I'm sorry, it is in the top copy, but that's the latest of it. It's not in the Samarkand. It's not in the Tashkent in Uzbekistan. It's not in the Husseini manuscript. It's not in the Michael manuscript. There's 5 of the 6 major manuscripts. The Fatiha, the one that you're talking about, is not even in those manuscripts. It is a later inclusion. So please, on that one, I will confront you on that. Now, you were here on Wednesday. You should have known that.
Okay, I'll check that. But you cannot prove that every surah, the first surah is bigger, the second and third is going to smaller to smaller to smaller. This is not a
rule of thumb. It's rule of thumb.
These surah was placed according to the revelation. The Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he himself told that God tell me that this surah should be first and the second, third, and like this. Even the verses are also like,
okay.
These are arranged by Muhammad, peace be upon him.
Now, I'm going to ask you one more question.
Please.
I'm going to throw it right back at you.
Let me complete.
I'm just going to talk about what you just said. Have you looked at any of the order of the surahs on all the earliest manuscripts? Do they follow that what you just said?
You are a historian. I am following the present Quran Kareem. So I don't have studied what was the first scripture and
just so everybody knows this.
So you have your study.
Just so everybody knows this, in all of the manuscripts that we have, they do not follow the same order of surahs. So this whole idea that Muhammad gave the references of the surahs is completely false.
I don't have studies, so I cannot talk to you.
Yeah. But I need to know this. So
okay.
This is not...
Okay. And the third one. You say that the Quran was not compiled in the life of the Holy Prophet. Quran exists in the life of the Holy Prophet by oral tradition. People memorize it in their heart, and when they recite this Quran in their prayer and in Ramadan, the Holy Quran was recited. So there was a sequence. How they recite this? They recite this is first, second, third, and the fourth. And there was an arrangement by the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Some people was appointed to write this revelation, and they teach the other people. And sometimes Holy Prophet himself asks the people, "I want to listen. You recite Holy Quran." So there was a tradition. Every people they recite the Holy Quran with a sequence. So it was present in their heart by which sequence. And it was also present on different
okay, let's take that
things.
Did you hear what he just said? How many of you believe that the Quran was memorized accurately and completely correct like the Quran we have today? How many believe that memorization supports what he just said? How do you know they memorized it? What did they memorize? What manuscript did they memorize? Did they memorize the top copy? Did they memorize the Samarkand, which doesn't agree with the top copy, which doesn't agree with the Umayyad, which doesn't agree with the Husseini, which doesn't agree with the Petroponus, which doesn't agree with the Sana? I've given you 6 major manuscripts. All of them are completely different. So what did they memorize? Secondly, where do you get your story that Muhammad made them memorize it and Muhammad was there? Where does that story come from? It comes from Al-Bukhari. When did he write that? In 870. So everything you're going to tell me, everything you're going to recite like you do every night, comes from 240 years later. How is it you can even trust that? Since we don't even know of a person named Muhammad who did any of this. Since we have no reference. And if you're going to say it doesn't matter that it wasn't written down, then what are you going to do with your own reference in Hadith number, chapter 6, Hadith number 509 and 510, which tells all of us that it was written down. And it was written down at the time of Abu Bakr, 2 years after Muhammad. What happened to that recension? Where is that codex? It was then rewritten again during the time of Uthman. Not memorized, written down. And 9 copies were made. Where are those 9 copies?
Brother, you have told you have a lecture. If you want to...
I'm asking these questions of you.
No. I have told you, my English is not very good. Your language is English, my language is not English. So I cannot follow you completely. But what I understand from your lecture, I want to explain that there is an opportunity they can understand and think, listen, a Muslim, how they believe. Okay?
I think we all know what Muslims believe.
I don't need...
Do you all know what Muslims believe? Is there anybody who doesn't know what Muslims believe? Everything Tariq is going to tell us is from the 9th and 10th century. This is the classic account that you hear ad nauseum, but you haven't dealt with what we're doing today. Tariq, you need to stick to the material we're talking about. Where is this historical record?
You give me this material, I'll give you my...
Okay, and what you need to do, Tariq, is you need to go home, like you did on Wednesday.
I study, I like study, okay? You are a historian, and I'll come here. all these 3 days I came, and my some fellow also come with me. But I tell you, you are saying that Quran was written in the time of the Abu Bakr, but it was already present. I have told you, oral tradition and memorized. People are satisfied that there is no problem. So when they feel that 500 Hufaz, though they memorized the Holy Quran, they martyred in a war, so they feel that we should compose it in a one book. So they composed it. And in the time of the Osman...
Listen, Tariq, everything you're saying we already know. This is nothing new. What we're asking
but your conclusion is different.
Tariq,
Your conclusion is different.
Let me finish.
So I want to tell you, no, you have given them lecture.
Now it's your turn to lecture.
Need that I can explain.
You want to listen to this for an hour and a half?
I want to.
Tariq, listen, wrap it up real quickly and then let us respond. Because I know you do this every time. You like to then give your own account. And that's nice. God bless you. Doesn't he have passion? Isn't it great that he loves to tell us exactly what he believes? But has he listened to anything I said today? Is he even dealing with this material? Can you see? It's going to be a waste of time for us, Tariq, just for you to tell us what you like us to hear. I know you love to talk.
As you like. If you don't want to know how
I want to respond to this very quickly, and I think, well, that'll be in for today. When you look and hear these kind of responses, and this is what you're going to get, do you notice he has not dealt with the material today? He hasn't even dealt with the material from Wednesday night. I don't think, Tariq, you have listened to anything we said Wednesday night or anything we've said today. And for those Muslims who are listening, this is not the way to defend your Prophet. And this is not the way to defend your Quran. You Muslims need to get a better defense than this. If all you're going to do is tell us what you already know, without dealing with the fact that this book that you always claim was memorized or was given to a man by Muhammad and given to the people at that time, show me one copy. Don't just say he gave it. Don't just say they memorized it. Prove it. If you're going to say that this was then written down at the time of Abu Bakr and then rewritten again at the time of Uthman in 652 and 9 copies were made, then give us one copy. That's all we're asking. If you're going to tell me that Islam somehow grew out of the desert in a period of 22 years, a sophisticated religion like we have today, in a nomadic environment with no urban structures, with all the rules and regulations, look at Sharia law. They make no sense in a nomadic environment in the middle of the desert. They make much more sense in a much more urban environment that would have existed in the 9th century. That's why is it not interesting that all of Islamic law, from Shafi, Maliki, Hanbali, and Hanafi, are 9th century writers. These are not 7th century writers. Now, Muslims need to be careful about just keep on telling us the same narrative. Deal with the historical problems. First of all, let me just run through they are. The first problem you have, Muslims, is that if God is going to give us a revelation and create a whole new religion that is different than what is already God, why in the world did he not give us a revelation that agreed with the previous revelations? Number one. Number two, if God suddenly, 600 years later, is going to give a new revelation in a completely new language, why in the world did he not use a language that could have accommodated it? The Arabic at the time of the 7th century didn't have any diacritical marks, had no vowelization. How could it even accommodate the text that we're looking at? Number three, if God was going to give us a brand new revelation and start a whole new religion, why in the world did he choose a man who could not read or write? Number four, if that man could not read or write, why did he not, in the next 22 years, did he not learn to read or write? If this is the most important thing he was supposed to be given for the rest of the world. Number five, why is it that when Islam finally supposedly was created, why was it created, according to you, in the middle of the desert which had no city named Mecca? And for 100 years that city didn't exist. Historically, you cannot get away with that. More than that, why is it that all the mosques, every one of the mosques that we've looked at, 65 of them, and we've been there physically, we've been there personally, every mosque is facing Petra. You've got the wrong city. You've got to deal with this, Dadi. Don't just tell me the story again. Why haven't you dealt with the problem of Mecca? Why have you not dealt with the problem of the Qibla? And why is it Muslims are just blanking out over and over again and just telling me the same narrative? You've got to tell me why every mosque is facing Petra. 600 miles too far north. You've got to tell me why there is no Mecca. That's 600 miles too far south. And why is it, if this man Muhammad was born in Mecca, grew up in Mecca, how could he have been born and grew up in a city that didn't even exist for another 100 years after him? More than that, If you are the ones that are telling me that Abraham was in Mecca, how is it that Abraham could have, who lived in 1900 BC, lived in a city that didn't exist, and what is he doing 600 miles too far south? Now can you understand why we're asking these questions? And everything I've asked today, except for the last part and the very first part, have nothing to do with me being a Christian. This is neutral as you can get. And for those who are watching this up on YouTube, any one of you can ask this question. It's already been asked of Christianity. It's already been asked about our Lord Jesus Christ. Every time we make a historical claim, whether it's by Abraham living in 1900 BC, we can back up that claim because we have documents to support who Abraham was, where he lived, the customs that he lived by. We have the Nuzi tablets, we have the Mara tablets, we have the Ebla tablets, all supporting we got the right man at the right place doing the right thing at the right time. And these all predate the Bible by a good 1400 years. When you look and you ask whether Moses could have done what he did, we not only know that who he could have done what he did, we have him in the right place. And what's more, in every case, one of the things I loved about living in London for 25 years, when you come to London, come to the British Museum, God bless the British, they stole everything, brought it to one building so we could look at it. And when you look at that British Museum, it supports 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. It supports the book of Jeremiah, the book of Isaiah, the book of Daniel. It even supports much of the book of Genesis. We have got the right men at the right place doing the right thing at the right time. And that's why we have a 3-hour tour just looking at all the artifacts. None of those artifacts have anything to do with Christianity or Judaism. It's all about the people who were impacted by Christianity and Judaism. It is all extra biblical material, proving that the Bible uniquely in the world is the only book that fits history. That's why when Muslims always come up to me and they say they don't like my Old Testament because you have terrible things that the prophet do. How can a prophet do these terrible things? I shake their hands. Because we have not sanitized the text. Yes, the great men of God did terrible things. Every other archaic historical book sanitizes it all. Even the Quran does. So when you get the prophet in the Quran, he is the best man, he is the best lover, he's the best husband, he's the best conqueror, in everything he is superlative. That's exactly what people do to men of their history. The Bible is unique. It doesn't sanitize a thing. David had terrible sins. Every man of God had terrible sins. We leave it there. And the Bible is the only piece of literature that leaves the sins there. Look at the New Testament. Look at the disciples who ran away from Jesus Christ when he was arrested. Look at Peter who denied Christ 3 times. Look at Paul. No one got along with Paul. Why did we not sanitize the text? Because we left the history there. Because God works with men who are sinful. Weak men like you and me. My God allows even sinful men to be part of his story. And the story I see in the Bible is the story of God taking weak clay pots, even prostitutes, and making them the ancestors for Jesus Christ. That's the kind of God we have, and that's the kind of book we have. Historically speaking, this has been attacked historically. In every case, history has shown that this book stands above any other book in history. You cannot find anything wrong with it. And I'll end with a quote by Nelson Gluck. Dr. Nelson Gluck said, "There is not one artifact, not one tablet, not one mural, not one obelisk, not one stela anywhere in the world that controverts a properly understood biblical statement." We pretty well not only destroyed the Quran on Wednesday, we destroyed also Muhammad and the whole emergence of Islam today by looking at all this material. This is just the beginning. Folks, come on back to this book and come back to the man behind this book. Because this book does stand the test. And we do not claim, we do not yell at people when they criticize it. We don't call them hate mongers like you did on Thursday. We don't need to say that. You can criticize this book anytime you want. You can criticize Jesus anytime you want. We don't even have a word called Islamophobia. I'm sorry, Christianophobia. That doesn't even exist. We don't need it because Jesus, under criticism, stands up to every criticism. The Bible, when criticizes, stands up to every criticism. What a man. What a book. I bring you home. God bless you. It's been great to have these 2 hours with you. Thanks, Toddy, for coming. You're such a blessing.